Good morning all. So continuing with the unit number 2, in today's lecture we are going to learn about copy constructor. We have seen two types of constructor. One is default constructor and another one is parameterized constructor. Today we are going to learn about the copy constructor. Then we are going to learn about the default function arguments. We are going to learn about the operator overloading using a friend function, followed by question answer session and multiple choice questions quiz. It's just a review quiz at the end of this session. So copy constructor. What is copy constructor? As the name suggests, it is a constructor. Keep in mind. The name says constructor. It is one type of constructor. It follows the functionality of the constructor that you have learned already. And the copy constructor is used for copying the constructor. Okay, so what is exactly copy constructor? A copy constructor is a member function which initializes an object using another object of the same class. Copy constructor, it is a member function. Keep in mind, constructor is a member function. It is a special member function. You are familiar with why it is called as a special member function. What is the task of constructor is to initialize the values. And what is the task of copy constructor is? It initializes an object using another object of the same class. Means it is used to copy the values present in another object into another object. That's why the name given copy constructor. That's why the name given copy constructor. So this is the function prototype for the copy constructor. So you should have a class name. Constructor will have class name and then constant and then name of the class and your passed object by reference with the help of this address of operator. So this is the general function prototype of the copy constructor. Again I am repeating, class name, then this is the constant, this is the class name, and this is the object, old object. It is passed by reference with the help of this address operator. So this is the example of copy constructor. We are going to learn it with the help of example. So this is the simple code wherein we will have one class, name of the class is point. Okay, which consists two private members x and y. Then in the public we have constructor point which receives values x1 and x1 y1 and it is initialized to x and y of this variable x and y here. Next we are going to declare the copy constructor. Now see how to declare the copy constructor. So this is the copy constructor. This is the name of the class, that is point. Constant, this is the name of the class point, and it will receive the old object. It is passed by reference with the help of address of operator. And what we have done here, we have copied pt.x, p2.x into the x value and p2.y into the y value. So again I am repeating how it will work. This is our copy constructor. It will receive one object. It will receive one object. It is stored in the object p2. Keep in mind. And that object's x value is initialized to x and its object y value initialized to y. So you are copying the values of another object. You are copying the values of another object. Then these are the two functions, get x and get y, to get the values of x and y. Here it is end of the class. In the main, let's see what we have written. In the main, we have created two objects. Point P1, when we say point P1 and we have passed two values, this constructor will be moved. And this 10 value is given to this x1 and this 15 value is given to y1 and it is initialized to x and y respectively. This is our normal constructor. In this statement, normal constructor which is declared over here will be called. Now when we write the second statement, point P2 is equal to P1, at this stage copy constructor is called. You are assigning values of P1 to P2. Values of P1 to P2. Here it is assignment operator. And both the operands are, here it is object P2 and here it is object P1. So automatically compiler will come to know that here it is you are copying the values of P1 into the P2. So behind the scene, this object P1 will be passed over here as a reference. And then here it is name given to this object is P2. You can give any name. So P2.x is initialized to x and P2.y is initialized to y. So all the values of x and y which is present in P1 will be initialized to object P2. This is how your copy constructor will work. Again I am repeating. Point P2 is equal to P1. So behind the scene, this object will be passed to this constructor, copy constructor. And values of P1 will be accessed and initialized to x and y variables of object P2. So you can print the values of this, just access the values. Just say P1.x, P1.getx, it will print the value 10. P1.y, P1.getY, it will print the value 20. Sorry, 15. 15 is there. P2.x, P2.getx will print the value 10 and P2.y, P2.getY will print the value 15. At the end of the program, and this is output of the program. And exactly whatever values of P1 will be copied to P2 object with the help of this copy constructor. That's why the name given copy constructor. As the name suggests, it is used to copy the values of another object. But you have to remember the use of constructor. The name of the constructor is same as that of the class name. Only little bit difference in the syntax. It will receive one object as an argument of type constant, and it is passed by reference, and then you can access this with the help of the object. So this is the use of copy constructor. Instead of, if you want to copy one object into another as it is, you can make use of this copy constructor. So this is the use of copy constructor. So when is copy constructor called? In C++, the copy constructor may be called in following cases. When an object of the class is written by value. When an object of the class is written by value. Second is when object of the class is passed to the function by value is an argument. And when an object is constructed based on another object of the same class, at that time copy constructor is called, and this is the way we have implemented in the previous code. So these are the situations wherein copy constructor is called. As per requirement of the problem statement, you can make use of this copy constructor to perform the copy of one object into another object. Sometimes you need to have temporary objects. When compiler generates a temporary object, you can make use of this copy constructor. So when user-defined copy constructor needed. This copy constructor is user-defined, means we are, as a programmer, we are going to define it. So when it is needed. If we don't define our own copy constructor, the C++ compiler generates a default copy constructor for each class, which define a member-wise copy between the objects. The compiler create copy constructor works fine in general. This will also help you. It is the compiler generated. But when we need to define our own copy constructor, only if an object has pointer or any runtime allocation of the resources like file handle or network connection, etc. At that time, you need to declare your own copy constructor. Only if object has a pointer or any runtime allocation of the resources like file handle, network connection, at that time you can make use of copy constructor. At that time you can define user-defined copy constructor. So why arguments to the copy constructor must be passed as a reference? A copy constructor is called when object is passed by value. Copy constructor itself is a function. So if we pass argument by value in copy constructor, the call to the copy constructor would be made to call copy constructor, which becomes a non-terminating chain of calls. Calling the same constructor will become a non-terminating chain of calls. Therefore, compiler doesn't allow parameters to be passed by value. Therefore, compiler doesn't allow parameters to be passed by value. In this case, you need to pass the value arguments as a reference. Why copy constructor argument should be constant in C++? Okay. Constant means you are familiar with the constant in learning C. Same concept is here. You can't make changes in that particular variable. So when we create our own copy constructor, we pass object by reference. When we create our own copy constructor, we pass an object by reference and we generally pass it as a constant reference. One reason for passing constant reference is we should use constant in C++ whenever possible so that objects are not accidentally modified. This is the reason behind passing the arguments as a constant. There should not be any modification accidentally. So this is the good reason for passing reference as a constant. So next is default function arguments. It's quite interesting and new to you. In C++ programming, we can provide default values for function parameters. Just understand this default value for function parameter. If function with default arguments is called without passing arguments, then default parameters are used. If particular function with the default arguments are present is called without passing arguments, then that by default parameters are used. We will see this with the help of examples so that you will have better understanding of these default function arguments. However, if arguments are passed while calling the function, the default arguments are ignored. You are passing the value for the arguments, then default arguments are ignored. Simply they are ignored. So just learn what is meant by default arguments. These are the images I have taken from the internet. This is our case 1. No arguments is passed. Just see, this is our temperature or temp function. Return type is void, and it will have two values, integer 10 and float 8.8. And this is the prototype of the temp function. And this is called as default value. This is called as default values. First value will be of integer and default value is 10. Second is float and value will be 8.8. And then in main we have declared the temp, and in the code, if suppose you are having you have written some code over here as per the requirement of this function, and you are calling the temp like this. You are not passing any arguments over here, but this temp will receive two parameters, two arguments, and you are not passing values over here while calling that temp. So by default, these arguments are passed, which is shown here over here dotted line. These arguments are passed. So for first integer I, 10 value will be initialized, and for second value 8.8 will be initialized to f. And this is called as default arguments. This is called as default arguments. Again, I am repeating. This is our case 1, wherein there is no argument is passed when you are calling the temp method. This is the signature of the temp. In the signature itself, we have initialized default values for two variables, integer and float. And in the temp, we receive two parameter arguments, integer I and float f. And while calling, we have not passed anything over here. In this case, this default values are passed to the function, and this is called as default arguments to the function. So 10 is initialized to I, and 8.8 it is initialized to f. So take another case. Suppose same function temp is there. This is the signature of the temp function, and in main we have called this temp using only one parameter. Only one parameter. So what happened in this case? Just see, this 6 will be initialized to the integer I, and simply this 10 will be ignored. And second parameter, we have not passed second parameter in the temp. This second parameter is received from the default argument, that is 8.8 it initialized to f. So this is how you can pass the default arguments. You can pass one argument and you are not passed another argument. It is also possible. If you have not passed any arguments, then default arguments will be received by that particular respective function. Take another example case. All arguments are passed. While calling the function, all arguments are passed. Temp 6, minus 2.3. And when you call this function like this values will be initialized to integer I, and this minus 2.3 is initialized to float A. In this case, these values are simply ignored. These default values are simply ignored. These values are initialized to or passed to the function temp. 6 is passed to I and minus 2.3 is passed to float. And this is the second last condition. You have passed only second argument and it is not allowed. You have to pass values from left to right like this. And what you have done over here, in temp you have passed 3.4 as a floating value to the second, but you have not passed to the first argument any value. Simply compiler will give you error message. This is not allowed. You can pass value to the first arguments and not to the second, it is allowed. But you are not passed to the first argument value and you are passed to the second, it is not allowed. The values must be from left to right. So we can understand the working of default arguments from the images above. The temp, this temp is called, both the default parameters are used by the function. When you call this temp with no arguments, then default parameters are used by the function. When you call the temp 6, the first argument becomes 6, while the default value is used for the second parameter. When you call temp 6, minus 2.3, both the default arguments are overridden using I is equal to 6 and f is equal to minus 2.3. When you say temp 3.4 is passed, the function behaves in an undesired way because the second argument cannot be passed without passing the first argument. So this is the little bit care you need to take while using the default arguments. So this 3.4 is passed to the first argument. Since first argument has been defined as integer, the value is not actually passed, is 3. So this is a simple code. Just see why it displays there. This is the signature of the display, and the default values is character is equal to star and integer is equal to 3. This is the signature of the display function. The main, we have mentioned integer count is equal to 5, and we have just printed it systematically. No arguments passed. Here it is. In the display, we have not passed the no arguments. So in this case, the default arguments are used. Suppose you have passed only the first argument like this, display hash, then it will ignore this first argument and by default second value will be taken. And both the arguments are passed like this, then it will simply ignore these both the arguments. let's see display function. Here it is, it will just print the character. In the display, it will receive character and count, and at that time, as per the value present in the count, it will print that particular character. So, what will be the output of the code? In this case, when you call this first display with no parameters, default parameters are these, and it will print the 3 times star. No argument passed, and it will print 3 times star. And when you pass this display with the hash, it will print this first argument passed and then 3 times hash. And when you say display hash dollar and count, it will print this both argument passed and this default arguments will help you. There is a situation, sometimes situation you don't know how many parameters you are passing there, or it depends on the situation. In that case, you can make use of this default arguments. So moving forward, so just this display is called without passing any arguments. In this case, display uses both the default parameters star and n is equal to 1. And when you say display, actually here it is 3. When you say display hash is called when one argument, only one argument. In this case, the first becomes hash and the second parameter becomes 3. And when you say hash count, display hash count, with the both the arguments, in this case, default arguments are not used. They are simply ignored. So things to remember while making use of default arguments. Once we provide a default value for a parameter, all subsequent parameters must also have default values. Again, I'm repeating, once we provide a default value for a parameter, all subsequent parameters must have default values. For example, if you mention like this void add integer a, integer b is equal to 3, integer c and d, it is not allowed. Once you mention b is equal to 3, you need to initialize value for c and d. It is not allowed. This is invalid in C++. Suppose you have mentioned void add integer a, integer b is equal to 3, and you just skip this c. You are not initialize any value over here, default value for this c, and you given default value for the integer d is equal to 4. It is also not possible. Once you start initialize from this, all subsequent variables should have a default value. And this is valid. Integer a, c, integer b and d. You have initialized b to 3 and d to 4. It is allowed. These two values are default values and they are not default values. You need to pass at least 2 parameters to the add function. So you need to remember this. Next is, if we define the default arguments in the function definition instead of the function prototype, then the function must be defined before the function call. So this is the invalid call. You have just mentioned in the main, you have mentioned this display, and then you have displayed this, you have used void display character star and count 5. This is not allowed. You have to mention this before the main. So these are the things you need to take care while writing code with the default arguments in the function. So next is operator overloading using a friend function. In the last lecture, we have seen the operator overloading, unary and binary. Just we are going to see how to make use of how to use operator overloading with the help of friend function. We have already learned the friend function. Just see. We can overload an operator for a class by using a non-member function, which is usually friend of the class. You can overload an operator for a class by using a non-member function, which is usually a friend of the class. Since a friend function is not member of the class, it does not have this pointer. It does not have this pointer. Therefore, an overloaded friend operator function is passed the operands explicitly. Therefore, the overloaded friend operator function is passed the operands explicitly. Has two parameters, and friend function that overloads a unary operator has one parameter. When overloading a binary operator using a friend function, the left operand is passed. The left operand is passed in the first parameter, and the right operand is passed in the second parameter. So important points about the operator overloading using the friend function is an overloaded operator friend could be declared in either private or public section of the class. When an operator overloaded function is friend function, it takes two operands of user defined data type. It takes two operands of user defined data type. When redefining the meaning of the operator by operator overloading friend function, we cannot change its basic meaning. For example, we can't redefine minus operator to divide two operands of the user defined data types. You need to keep the meaning, basic meaning same. So these are the points that you remember while overloading the function using the overloading operator using the friend function. So with the help of code, I will explain this. So is this screen visible and code is readable? Yes, anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is the simple code which demonstrate how to use operator overloading by using the friend function. So in the we have created a class saints. So in the saints class we have just one private variable.
Is not visible.
Is it visible?
No.
Any other students? Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I will continue this. Private integer am sense. This is one variable which will store the value sense. In the public, we have constructor sense, which will receive the sense and initialize values to the msent variable. And in the friend function, just see we have written this signature over here. Friend, this is the return type sense, this is the operator keyword, and this is the symbol plus. And this is the constant first parameter. As this friend function doesn't receive any this pointer, we need to pass the parameter as explicit. This is a constant sense address of C1 and constant sends address of C2. This constant means these values present in this object are constant. You cannot modify it. Simply you can make use of these values to initialize the values or perform some addition. You can't make the changes into it. And there is one method getSense which simply returns the mSense. And this is the body of this friend function. Sends operator plus, and this is the constant send C1 and constant sends C2. Address of C1 and address of C2. They are passed by reference. And here it is, just we have just added these values of send mSense of C1 and C2, and it will simply returns the object. Just see sends C1 dot mSense plus C2 dot mSense. It will simply do the addition and it will return the sense. And in the main, we have created two objects of this sense 1 and sense 2, and just we have passed value 6 and 8. So when you call this sense 1 6, constructor will be initialized, and this mSense will be initialized to 6. When you say sense 2 8, it will be initialized to mSense to 8. Now the values of these two objects will be added by using this plus operator. Just see, we created another sense object, sense sum is equal to sense 1 plus sense 2, and these both are the objects, and we have just overlaid this plus operator. And behind the scene, these two objects are passed to the friend function, which is declared over here, and this sense 1 will be initialized to this C1 and sense 2 will be initialized to this C2, and accordingly you can perform the operations over here, and it will return the addition of these two variables present in C1 and C2, and it will be initialized to sense sum. And now with the help of this sense sum object getSense, we simply return the addition of these two sense. Just see the output. It simply says I have 14 cents. I have 14 cents. The addition of 6 plus 8, that is 14. So this is how you have to make use of, you can write the operator overloading with the help of friend function. You can write the same for the minus operation. Just see, this is the way to declare it. Friend sends operator minus. I'm going to use the minus operator, okay, for subtraction, and then this is the body of the sends. So here it is in the minus. Simply I have done the minus operation, and in the sense I have so and so sense. I will take another object and I will do that and minus, and at the end I will bring the values. So you have to say sub is the object. So this is how I have overloaded the plus and minus with the help of two friend functions, and just see the output. First is addition, that is 14 cents, and next one is subtraction, that is minus 2 cents. So when you say sense 1 plus sense 2, this plus operator will be executed. And when you say sense 1 minus sense 2, this minus operator overloaded will be executed. So this is how you can make use of operator overloading with the help of friend function.